So today's question is, should you buy a Rockwell Commander 114? When a pilot asks that, what you're really asking isn't what does the brochure say? It's what's this thing like to live with, day in, day out. On the ramp, the Commander absolutely looks the part. Big doors, wide cabin, nice stance, very mini cabin class, rather than trainer with retracts. The real issue is whether the way it actually flies, carries people, and burns money matches that look, and whether it fits the kind of flying you really do. In simple terms, a good Commander is a comfortable mid-140-knot touring machine that burns a bit over 12 gallons an hour and will genuinely carry 4 normal adults in bags in the right configuration. It sits between the Mooney and Bonanza world. Not as fast or as efficient as the best Moonies, not as big and hungry as a 6-seat Piper or Beech. If you want something that feels like a proper traveling airplane rather than a dressed-up trainer, that's where the Commander starts to make sense. Let's talk speed first, because that's where the brochure and the real-world part company. On paper, the early 114s are sold as roughly 150-knot machines, and the later 114B is pitched as a bit quicker again. In real life, most owners with the early 114s see mid-140s in cruise if they run them reasonably hard, and a little slower if they pull the power back and lean properly. The B models will usually sit right around 150 knots when set up sensibly. Nobody is seeing the wild brochure numbers every day. Most of the time, people flight plan somewhere around 140 to 145 knots in the older airplanes and about 150 in the B, and that seems to be where they actually land. Fuel flow follows the same pattern. If you sit up around the higher power settings, you're in that low teens gallons per hour band. If you pull it back, manage mixture properly, and accept losing a handful of knots, you drop into the 11-ish gallons an hour area. There's nothing shocking there. Think typical 6-cylinder tourer, not miracle economy machine, and you won't be disappointed. The important bit is that the speed and fuel burn sit together in a reasonable place. You're not gunning fuel for no payoff, but you're also not in Mooney 201 territory where you're wringing every knot per liter out of a narrower airframe. And that's how people actually fly them. Most owners live between 6,000 and 10,000 feet in cruise, where the airplane feels happy, the ride is usually okay, and you don't have to mess with oxygen. Power-wise, they tend to live at that comfortable 2/3 to 70% range rather than flogging it, and they only push up towards max cruise when they've got a schedule or a headwind to beat. A lot of people still run rich of peak out of habit. The engine management nerds will pull it back and run lean of peak, trade a couple of knots for nicer fuel flows and slightly kinder cylinder temps. When they punch a number into the flight plan, they're not thinking 160. They're thinking, call it 140, 145 in an early one, 150 in a nice B. And in practice, that works. Loading is where you have to stop thinking about the brochure and start thinking about actual empty weight. On paper, the original 114 looks great. Plenty of useful load, plenty of fuel. Everyone goes home happy. In the real world, over decades, glass panels, autopilots, air conditioning, and other mods have crept into the fleet and eaten into that useful load. Some airplanes are still comparatively light. Others have had so much equipment bolted in that they behave more like heavy four-seaters with compromises. The simplest way to look at it is this. A lighter early 114 will comfortably do 4 normal adults, weekend bags, and full fuel without you sweating the weight and balance sheet. That's one of its strengths. For a mid-size 4-seat retract, it's genuinely capable of taking 4 people and real fuel at the same time, as long as the empty weight hasn't blown out. Once you move into later, more heavily equipped 114s and 114Bs, you still have a usable 4-seat airplane, but you start trading fuel against people. 4 decent-sized adults and bags is still fine, but now you're often fueling into the middle of the gauges rather than up the neck. It does not haul like a Saratoga or a 6-seat Cessna, but it is not a fake 4-seater either. In its own class, it sits in the middle of the pack. It carries less than the true load haulers, but more comfortably than some of the sleek, narrow-body speed machines. Range follows from that. On paper, the numbers look huge, as they always do. Long legs at low power, pretty lines in the POH. In daily use, most owners treat it as a 3 to 3.5 hour airplane with generous reserves. At the cruise settings people actually use, that translates into easy 400 to 500 mile legs without drama. And the option to stretch towards the 5 to 600 mile mark when the wind is friendly, or you're willing to live with a slightly tighter fuel margin. The point is not that it's the longest legged airplane in the class. It isn't. The point is that for typical European or US regional trips, it will usually go further than your passengers want to sit without a stretch and a coffee, and you're not constantly feeling like you're fuel limited. Where things get serious is on the ownership side. The Commander is not a mystery airplane, but it does have some type-specific homework. There are known hot spots in the structure. The elevator spar, some of the attachment points, and the landing gear mounts are areas you want documented inspections and clear recent sign-offs on. There are ADs and service bulletins that matter. You don't have to memorize the numbers, but you absolutely have to make sure someone who knows the type has gone looking in all the right places and written it down. This is not the kind of airplane where you shrug and say, "Logs are a bit thin, but it looks tidy." The fuel system is also something you have to respect. It works fine if you operate it the way the community has learned to operate it, but it has its quirks. There is a reason Commander instructors talk strongly about selector position, cross-feeding, and how you park it. Again, nothing to be scared of, but it's not a Cessna 152 where you can ignore the fuel panel and hope for the best. A good pre-buy on a Commander includes a conversation with the current owner about how they actually manage fuel, not just whether the caps seal. Support-wise, you are living in a smaller ecosystem than you would in a Cessna or Piper. Parts are still available and the owners group is very active, but your life is easier if you have a shop nearby that has seen a few of these and has the manuals open, rather than a generic maintenance outfit learning on your airplane. When people get into trouble with Commanders, it's usually when they buy a cheap one, put it on a field where nobody knows the type, and then wonder why the annuals keep finding surprises. Costs end up broadly in line with what you'd expect for a 260 horsepower retract. Fuel and oil take their slice, the engine reserve looks like any other IO-540, and the annuals are not outrageous if the airplane is in good shape. In today's money, once you add fuel, maintenance, engine fund, insurance, and a hangar, it will cost you roughly $240 to $270 an hour to fly a Commander if you're doing a fairly typical 75 to 100 hours a year. If you don't fly much and only do 40 to 50 hours a year, the fixed cost will push your per hour number up into the $300 plus territory. But if you do fly it like a proper traveling machine and log 150 to 200 hours a year, that drops more into the $190 to $210 an hour bracket. Underneath the rounding, it behaves just like any other complex four-seater on the books. It is not famously cheap to run, but it is not some exotic money pit either, provided you buy a good one and keep up with it. The last piece of the picture is what else you could have for the same money. In Commander territory, you're usually cross-shopping a Mooney, a decent 1A2, maybe an Aero, or the bottom end of the 6-seat market. The Mooney will give you more speed for less fuel, but it will feel narrower and more down in a hole inside. The 1A2 will give you fixed gear, great short-field manners, and a huge support network. But you lose the low-wing cabin feel and the big doors. The Aero will usually be cheaper to buy, but it doesn't have the same sense of traveling machine. It feels more like a trainer that can go places. 6-seat types will carry more and sometimes go just as fast, but they'll drink more, cost more, and you may not actually need the extra seats. And then there's the aspirational stuff people start eyeing in the same price band. Older Bonanzas, entry-level Cirrus, the odd clean TB20 or 182RG. A bow will give you that beach feel and in some cases a bit more speed and load, but you're into older airframes, more cylinders, higher parts prices, and a very serious maintenance culture. A Cirrus buys you parachute, branding, and resale, but at this money you're usually looking at early SR-20 territory. Similar crews on less fuel, with a slightly wider, more modern cabin, but a very different feel in ergonomics. The French and European exotics like the TB20 will do the touring job nicely too, though parts and type-specific support can be thinner depending on where you are. The 182RG, on the other hand, is basically a slicker 182 with the usual deep Cessna support behind it. You just take on retractable gear complexity and cost. By comparison, the Commander ends up as the nice car choice. Not the fastest thing in the class, not the biggest, but a very comfortable, good-looking mid-pack performer that makes the most sense if you care more about how it feels to sit in and live with than about shaving the last few knots or squeezing in a sixth seat you almost never use. So, bringing it back to the question, should you buy one? If you're flying as mostly 2 or 3 people on 300 to 400 mile trips, you care a lot about comfort, visibility, and cabin feel, and you like the idea of a low-wing tourer that cruises in the mid-140s rather than chasing every last knot, a good Commander can be a really satisfying airplane. You have to be willing to do the homework on structure, fuel, and maintenance, and you have to accept that you're not in the cheapest or fastest slot in the class. But if you want something that feels like a proper airplane rather than a dressed-up trainer, and you buy the right example, the Commander starts to look less like how bad is it, and more like this actually fits what I do. So, that's it for today's video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. It goes a long way for us.